Welcome everyone. Today we bring you an extraordinary and chilling story, one that is rarely heard but needs to be told. We've all heard countless stories of people who have had near-death experiences, seeing brilliant lights, heavenly kingdoms, breathing flowers, and even Jesus welcoming them with open arms. But today's story is far from that. It's the opposite, a terrifying experience that most people don't talk about. This is why we felt compelled to bring this information to you, so you can be aware of what lies beyond and the choices that truly matter. These stories are rarely spoken of, yet they hold powerful warnings and life-changing lessons. What did they see? How did they escape? And what message did they bring back? Stay with us as we uncover the shocking truth behind these experiences. Stories that will challenge everything you thought you knew about the afterlife. Let's begin. 23 Minutes in Hell. The terrifying story of Bill Wiese. Bill Wiese never expected his life to change overnight. He was a successful real estate agent living in California, a devoted Christian, and an ordinary man who had never experienced anything supernatural. Until one horrifying night in 1998. What started as a peaceful evening turned into a terrifying journey into the depths of hell. An experience so vivid, so horrifying, that it would shake him to his core and compel him to share his testimony with the world. According to him, it was 3 a.m. when he found himself abruptly pulled from his sleep. Without warning, he said he felt his soul being violently yanked out of his body, and within seconds he was plunging downward into total darkness. He could see nothing, but he felt himself falling, accelerating at an impossible speed. A deep sense of terror overwhelmed him. He knew he was being taken somewhere dreadful, somewhere inescapable. Then he hit the ground. As his vision adjusted, a horrific heat enveloped him. He found himself in a dimly lit cell, a stone dungeon with rough, jagged walls that pulsed with an eerie, sickly orange glow. The air was thick, suffocating, reeking of sulfur and decay. His throat burned with dryness, and his body ached with an unbearable weight, as if his bones were about to snap under an unseen force. Two massive creatures loomed in the darkness. Hideous, reptilian, grotesque beyond imagination, they stood at least 10 feet tall, with glistening scales and razor-sharp claws. Their eyes burned with pure hatred, and as they glared at him, Bill said he felt an overwhelming wave of terror, a terror deeper than anything humanly possible. One of the beasts grabbed him and hurled him against the wall, sending shockwaves of agony through his body. He crumpled to the ground, gasping in pain. But there was no time to recover. The creatures came at him again, clawing, tearing into his flesh, laughing as they inflicted unimaginable torment. He screamed in agony, but his voice produced no sound. The realization struck him like a dagger. In hell, no one can cry for help. His thoughts echoed in his mind, but his voice was stolen, his suffering a silent, never-ending nightmare. The creatures taunted him, delighting in his pain. "You belong here," they hissed. "No one is coming to save you." Staggering to his feet, Bill said he ran. Every step was an agony, as though his body were shattered from within. As he stumbled forward, he saw an enormous pit of fire, a lake of flames that stretched endlessly, filled with writhing, tormented souls screaming in eternal agony. Their cries were deafening, each one echoing with unbearable suffering. He could see their twisted, contorted faces, their flesh melting and reforming, an endless cycle of pain. There was no hope, no escape, only pure, unrelenting torment. He wanted to help them, but he couldn't. This was a place of judgment, a place where mercy no longer existed. Then he felt a presence. In an instant, a blinding light pierced through the darkness. The monstrous creatures shrieked in terror, backing away as if repelled by an unseen force. A hand reached out, grabbing Bill and lifting him upward. A voice, deep and powerful, filled his soul with peace. "It is not your time." The next thing he knew, he was back in his body, lying on the floor of his home. Sweat drenched his skin, his heart was pounding violently, and his mind was reeling from the experience. For 23 minutes he had been in hell. And now he was back. Shaken beyond words, Bill said, he knew that what he had experienced was not a dream. The pain, the terror, the sheer hopelessness, it was all too real. Overwhelmed, he dropped to his knees, thanking God for his mercy. He knew he had been spared to deliver a message, a warning to those who doubted the existence of hell. Bill Wiese would go on to write 23 Minutes in Hell, a book that would shake countless people to their core. He dedicates his life to sharing his testimony, warning others that hell is real, but so is God's grace, love, and salvation. 2. Howard Storm, the atheist professor who saw hell. Howard Storm had everything he needed in life, or so he thought. A successful art professor, fiercely intelligent, and a committed atheist, he had long dismissed the idea of an afterlife. To him, religious beliefs were fairy tales, crutches for the weak. He had built his life on logic and reason, leaving no room for faith or spirituality. But on June 1, 1985, his worldview would be shattered in the most horrifying way possible. Howard was on a trip to Paris with his wife and students when, out of nowhere, he collapsed in agonizing pain. He was rushed to the hospital and diagnosed with a perforated stomach, a fatal condition if not treated immediately. But there was a problem. The hospital couldn't perform the necessary surgery right away. As he lay in his hospital bed, waiting for a doctor who never seemed to arrive, his body began to shut down. Then suddenly, he died. But death, as he would soon learn, wasn't the end. At first, Howard said he felt an eerie sense of detachment. He could see his lifeless body on the hospital bed, his wife crying beside him, but he wasn't inside it anymore. Instead, he felt completely fine. Even better than fine. He felt light, painless, and strangely alive. Then he heard voices. They called his name softly at first, almost like whispers. Then they grew louder. A group of shadowy figures appeared at the end of the hospital room, beckoning him to follow. Their voices were calm, almost soothing. "Come with us, Howard. We've been waiting for you." Still disoriented, Howard said he obeyed. According to him, he followed the shadowy beings as they led him into what looked like a long, endless hallway. As he moved forward, the light behind him faded. The hallway grew darker, colder, and the voices of his guides became twisted, mocking, and cruel. Then he realized he was no longer in a hospital. He was somewhere else entirely. The welcoming whispers turned into jeering laughter. The figures around him grew larger, grotesque, monstrous. Their once friendly invitations turned into mocking taunts. "You're ours now, Howard." They began to push, shove, and tear at him. He fought back, but he was powerless. The more he struggled, the harder they laughed. They clawed at his flesh, bit into his skin, but the worst part wasn't the pain, it was the hopelessness. In that moment, Howard Storm said he understood one terrible truth. Hell was real, and he was in it. He had spent his entire life denying God, and now, surrounded by demons who reveled in his suffering, he realized that he was completely alone, with no one to save him. As they ripped at his soul, Howard said he felt himself sinking deeper into absolute despair. Then a memory surfaced, a memory from childhood, long before he had abandoned belief in God. "Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so." It was just a song, a simple Sunday school hymn he had mocked as an adult. But in this moment, it was all he had left. With every ounce of strength he had, Howard screamed into the darkness, "Jesus, save me." For the first time, the demons stopped laughing. A light appeared in the distance, growing brighter. A warmth unlike anything he had ever felt flooded the darkness. The creatures shrieked in agony, recoiling from the light. Then, from within the radiant glow, a presence emerged. Howard said he couldn't see his face, but he knew exactly who it was. Jesus Christ. With one command, the terrifying beings scattered into the void, screaming as they fled. Howard said he felt himself lifted from the darkness, embraced by a presence so overwhelmingly loving that he began to weep. Jesus spoke without words, but Howard understood everything. "I have always been here. I have always loved you. Call on me and I will never leave you." In that moment, Howard Storm was reborn. Howard woke up back in his hospital bed, gasping for air. His wife screamed for the doctors, but Howard barely noticed. He had just been rescued from the depths of hell. The experience shook him to his core. The proud atheist professor who had spent years mocking faith now had only one desire: to tell the world that Jesus was real. Hell was real, and salvation was a choice. He left his career as a professor and became a Christian minister, spending the rest of his life sharing his testimony. He wrote books, gave speeches, and traveled the world, warning people that hell was not a myth, but neither was the grace of God. To this day, his story continues to change lives, a powerful proof that no one is beyond redemption, not even an atheist professor who found himself at the gates of hell. Mother 3. Mary K. Baxter's 40-Day Revelation. The night was quiet when Mary Kay Baxter, the devoted Christian woman, was abruptly awakened by a presence unlike anything she had ever felt before. It was Jesus Christ himself, standing before her in radiant glory, his eyes filled with both love and urgency. According to Mary, he spoke in a voice that resonated through her very soul. "I have chosen you for a mission. For 40 nights, I will take you on a journey into the depths of hell so that you may witness its reality and warn the world." A chill ran down her spine, but she felt an overwhelming sense of peace in his presence. She knew that what she was about to experience was not a dream, not a figment of imagination, but a divine revelation. In an instant, Mary said she felt her spirit separate from her body. She was suddenly descending into an endless pit of darkness. A foul stench filled the air, a mixture of rotting flesh, sulfur, and burning decay. Then she heard it. The most horrifying, blood-curdling screams imaginable. Cries of hopelessness and agony filled the realm. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw lost souls trapped in torment, each one suffering in a unique and terrifying way. She turned to Jesus, who stood beside her, his expression filled with deep sorrow. "These are those who have rejected my salvation," he said. "They are here because they chose to live apart from me. I desire that no one perishes, but many refuse to repent." Mary said her heart ached at the sight before her. She watched as demons with grotesque, twisted forms tormented souls, laughing with a wicked delight as they inflicted pain beyond human comprehension. As they walked, Mary said she saw a massive pit filled with fire, where countless people writhed in agony, their bodies engulfed in flames that never consumed them. A woman reached out, her skeletal hands trembling, her eyes filled with despair. "Lord, please let me out," the woman wailed. Jesus' face remained sorrowful. "You had many chances to repent, but you hardened your heart." Tears ran down Mary's face. She realized that these souls had no way out, no hope of redemption. They were here forever, trapped in a state of eternal regret. Then she saw pastors and preachers, their cries filling the abyss. "Why are they here?" Mary asked, shocked. "Because they preached for their own glory and not for mine," Jesus said. "They misled my people, seeking wealth and power instead of truth." She said Jesus led her into a chamber of darkness, where skeletal figures sat chained to walls, unable to move. They groaned in torment, their empty eye sockets filled with supernatural fire. "These," Jesus explained, "are those who practiced witchcraft, sorcery, and divination. They sought power through darkness instead of my light. They were warned, yet they refused to turn from their ways." Mary's heart felt heavy. Then she said Jesus took her to another section of hell. Here she saw people who looked like ordinary churchgoers, people who once sang in choirs, prayed in churches, and read the Bible. "Why are they here, Lord?" Mary asked. "Because they had religion, but not a relationship with me," he replied. "They called me Lord, Lord, but their hearts were far from me. They refused to forgive, they refused to love, and they lived in hypocrisy." Terror gripped Mary. She had always believed going to church was enough, but now she realized God desires more than empty rituals. The weight of despair and hell was overwhelming. Mary felt as if she couldn't take another step. The wailing, the suffocating fear, and the inescapable doom of the lost souls left her shaken to the core. "Lord, please, take me away from this place," she cried out. Jesus turned to her, his voice firm yet filled with compassion. "Now you see the truth, Mary. You must go back and tell the world what you have witnessed. Hell is real, and I desire that no one ends up here. My mercy is available, but people must choose me before it is too late." Suddenly, she felt herself rising, her spirit being pulled back toward the light. The screams of the lost faded into the distance, and then she woke up. Mary gasped for breath as she found herself back in her room. The memory of hell was seared into her mind, the cries, the suffering, the reality of what she had just seen. From that day forward, she made it her life's mission to warn as many people as possible. She wrote a divine revelation of hell, traveled the world, and spoke boldly about what she had witnessed. Her message was clear. Hell is real. Eternity is forever. There is still time to choose salvation. Her testimony shook millions of people, reminding them that their choices on earth determine their eternal destiny. Would they heed the warning, or would they dismiss it, only to realize the truth when it was too late? Mary Kay Baxter's 40-day journey into hell was not just a vision. it was a divine assignment. Her testimony reminds us that beyond this life, eternal destinations exist. Her question remains, where will you spend eternity? 4. The shocking near-death experiences of Dr. Maurice Rawlings' patients. Dr. Maurice Rawlings had spent years as a respected cardiologist, accustomed to the precise, clinical world of medicine. But as he resuscitated dying patients, he began to witness something he could not explain. Accounts that went far beyond medical science and into the realms of the supernatural. He had revived dozens of patients suffering from cardiac arrest, bringing them back from the brink of death. But what truly shook him was what some of them described during those critical moments between life and death. These weren't stories of white lights, peaceful tunnels, or angelic music. Instead, they were tales of fire, darkness, horrifying creatures, and sheer unrelenting terror. The moment they regained consciousness, these patients would scream, tremble, and beg not to die again, some even pleading for him not to let them slip back into the abyss they had just escaped. According to him, one patient, a middle-aged man, suffered a severe heart attack and collapsed. As Dr. Rawlings and his team performed CPR and defibrillation, something chilling happened. The man's body jerked violently, and his eyes shot open in sheer terror. He grabbed Dr. Rawlings' collar with an iron grip and let out a blood-curdling scream. "Don't let me go back. Please help me. I'm in hell." His words stunned the entire medical team. Dr. Rawlings continued working to stabilize him, but the man kept screaming, pleading, and convulsing, describing a place so horrifying that his voice shook with pure desperation. He spoke of creatures lurking in the shadows, of fire that burned but did not consume, of people crying out in pain yet unable to die. Every time he slipped into unconsciousness, he would begin screaming again, as if his soul was falling back into the depths of an unimaginable nightmare. Then, as the defibrillator shocked his chest again, his tone suddenly shifted. His face, once twisted in horror, went eerily calm. As his breathing steadied and his heart rate returned to normal, he stopped talking about hell altogether. Instead, he revised his story, brushing it off as a hallucination, a trick of the mind caused by oxygen deprivation. But Dr. Rawlings had seen it too many times to dismiss it. He knew what he had just witnessed, and he wasn't alone. This wasn't a one-time incident. Over the years, multiple patients reported similar nightmarish experiences. Each time, it happened the same way. They would cry out in terror about being in hell. They would describe fire, suffering, and shadowy figures tormenting them. They would beg not to go back. And then, once fully stabilized, they would deny it all, or claim to remember nothing at all. Dr. Rawlings couldn't shake the thought. Were these people catching a glimpse of something real? Something beyond the realm of medical science? If hell was nothing more than a myth, why were his patients so consistently and vividly describing the same horrifying place? He started documenting these experiences, realizing that they challenged everything he had once believed about life, death, and what comes after. Dr. Rawlings said the encounters changed him forever. He began researching near-death experiences in depth, uncovering more and more cases that aligned with what he had seen in his own emergency room. He came to a terrifying conclusion. Most people are completely unprepared for what happens after death. If what my patients experienced was real, then we need to take it seriously. Because by the time we die, it may be too late to change where we end up. Were these simply hallucinations, or were his patients catching a glimpse of a truth the world refuses to believe? The stories of heavenly near-death experiences are well documented. But what if the opposite is just as real? What if hell isn't just an old religious warning, but a place waiting on the other side for those who don't believe it exists? Dr. Maurice Rawlings would never see life and death the same way again. And after hearing his patients' desperate cries from the abyss, neither would anyone who listened to their stories. Was it just a hallucination? Or was it a warning? The answer remains in the shadows, waiting for those who dare to find out. 5. The surfer who saw hell before heaven, the near-death experience of Ian McCormack. Ian McCormack was a man who lived for the thrill of the ocean. Born in New Zealand, he had always been drawn to adventure, chasing waves in some of the most breathtaking waters on Earth. Surfing was his life, his religion, his escape. But one fateful night off the coast of Mauritius, His love for the sea led him into the most terrifying encounter of his existence, one that would take him beyond death itself. Ian had spent the day riding the waves with his friends, basking in the golden glow of the tropical sun. As the evening set in, he decided to go night diving, something he had done countless times before. The ocean was his playground, and he felt invincible. But that night, the ocean had other plans. As he swam through the warm, dark waters, he saw them, box jellyfish, tiny, nearly invisible, and one of the most venomous creatures in the world. Before he could react, a searing pain shot through his body. Then another sting, and another. 4, maybe 5 times, he was stung. The venom of just one box jellyfish can be fatal, yet he had been hit multiple times. Panic set in as his body began to seize up, his muscles locking, his vision blurring. According to him, the excruciating pain felt like fire running through his veins. He somehow managed to reach the shore, but by the time he did, his body was shutting down. Locals tried to help, but there was nothing they could do. He was rushed into an ambulance, slipping in and out of consciousness, his life draining away with each passing second. Inside the ambulance, Ian said he realized he was dying. The thought that chilled him to the core wasn't just that his life was ending, but that he had lived for himself, without any belief in God. His mind raced back to his mother, a Christian woman who had always prayed for him, telling him about Jesus. But Ian had never taken it seriously. Now, facing the abyss, he wondered, what if she was right? As the venom overtook his body, his heart stopped. Everything went black. At first, there was nothing but an eerie silence. No light, no sound, just an endless void of complete darkness. Then, he began to feel something. A presence. A dreadful, suffocating evil. He wasn't alone. He could sense others there, trapped, tormented, whispering in the shadows. Their cries echoed in the abyss, filled with hopelessness and despair. Terror gripped him. Am I in hell? Ian said he had never believed in such things, but now, faced with the horrifying reality, he knew that he was in a place of utter separation from anything good. He felt the weight of his choices, his selfishness, his rejection of faith. There was no escape. He was lost. But then, a voice. A memory. His mother's voice, urging him to pray, telling him that no matter what, God could save him. A desperate plea for mercy. With the last flicker of his consciousness, Ian cried out, God, if you are real, help me. Save me. In that instant, something changed. A brilliant light appeared in the distance, piercing through the suffocating darkness. It grew brighter, warmer, radiating peace, love, and a presence that felt more real than anything he had ever known. Then, like a force pulling him upward, he was lifted out of the darkness, carried by an unseen presence into a realm of indescribable beauty. Ian said he found himself standing in a place filled with pure, radiant light. It wasn't just light, it was life itself, pulsating with warmth, love, and a profound peace that surpassed anything he had ever felt. The atmosphere was alive with colors he had never seen before, and music so beautiful it seemed to resonate deep within his soul. Before him stood a presence so overwhelmingly powerful, yet filled with unimaginable love. It was Jesus. Ian fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the sheer holiness before him. But instead of judgment, he felt love. Pure, unconditional, boundless love. Jesus showed him glimpses of his life, his mistakes, his selfish pursuits, but not with condemnation. Instead, he offered Ian a choice. Stay in this paradise or return to earth. Ian wanted to stay. Every part of him longed to remain in this realm of peace, far away from the suffering he had known. But then he thought of his family, his mother, his loved ones who didn't know the truth of what he had just witnessed. He knew he had to go back. Lord, if I return, I will tell them about this place. I will tell them about you. Back to life. The next moment, Ian gasped for air. He was back in his body, lying in the hospital morgue. Doctors had already declared him dead. But now, against all logic, his heart started beating again. His body was still weak, but his soul had been transformed. Ian had been given a second chance, not just at life, but to share his testimony with the world. From that moment on, his life was never the same. He abandoned his old ways and dedicated himself to sharing his incredible experience with anyone who would listen. His story became a beacon of hope, proof that no one is too far gone to be saved. His message was simple. God is real, heaven is real, and no matter who you are or what you've done, you are loved beyond measure. Ian McCormack's journey from the depths of hell to the gates of heaven remains one of the most extraordinary near-death experiences ever recorded. Would you believe his story, or will you wait until it's too late to find out? Number 6. Brian Melvin's journey from atheist to believer. After seeing hell, Brian Melvin never believed in heaven or hell. In fact, he was a proud atheist, someone who dismissed religion as nothing more than fairy tales for the weak-minded. To him, science explained everything, and the idea of an afterlife was nothing more than wishful thinking. That was until one fateful day when a simple glass of contaminated water changed his life forever. The day everything changed. It started like any other normal day. Brian said he was at home, going about his usual routine when he drank a glass of water from a jug sitting on the counter. Unbeknownst to him, the water was contaminated with harmful bacteria, and within hours his body began shutting down. He felt an overwhelming weakness take over him. His stomach churned, nausea set in, and suddenly a searing pain shot through his entire body. His vision blurred, his breathing became shallow, and then darkness. He collapsed. At first, he said he was unaware that he had died. Everything around him was black, but it wasn't just darkness, it was a void. It felt cold and empty, a silence so heavy that it pressed against his very soul. Then, out of the shadows, a force began pulling him downward. A deep sense of dread settled over him as he realized he was moving, but not by his own will. He was being drawn into something terrifying. As his surroundings came into focus, Brian found himself in a place of absolute torment. The air was thick, filled with the stench of burning sulfur and rotting flesh. The ground beneath him wasn't solid. It pulsed like living flesh, oozing with a sickening heat. The sound of distant screams echoed all around him, screams of agony, despair, and endless suffering. It was then that he saw them, the lost souls. Brian said he watched in horror as thousands, maybe millions of tormented souls writhed in agony. Their bodies twisted and contorted unnaturally, their faces frozen in expressions of unending pain and regret. They reached out, clawing at the air, their mouths opening to scream, but their voices were barely heard, drowned out by an overwhelming chorus of suffering. Demonic creatures roamed between them, inflicting pain without mercy. Some souls were trapped in pits of fire, their bodies consumed but never turning to ash. Others were bound in chains, dragged by unseen forces into even deeper levels of torment. Brian said he tried to move, but something held him in place. The weight of despair settled over him like a crushing force, and for the first time, true fear gripped his heart. He wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but he couldn't. As he stood frozen in terror, Brian said he felt a presence near him. A shadowy figure loomed closer, its form shifting and twisting, exuding pure malice. The moment it locked eyes with him, Brian understood the truth. This place was real. Hell was real. And worse, he belonged here. Memories of his life flashed before him. The moments he mocked believers, the times he scoffed at the idea of a higher power, the arrogance with which he dismissed faith, all of it played in his mind like a cruel, ironic joke. He had spent his entire life denying the existence of God, and now, here he was, facing the consequences. As the demonic entity reached for him, Brian did something he had never done before. He prayed. With every ounce of strength left in him, he called out to God. Not a rehearsed prayer, not a logical argument, just a desperate plea. Jesus, save me. The very second those words left his lips, everything changed. A brilliant light pierced through the darkness, so bright that it forced back the shadows. The moment the light touched him, Brian felt an overwhelming peace, a warmth that flooded his soul and pulled him away from the depths of hell. He felt himself ascending, the wails of the tormented souls fading into the distance. The suffocating heat was replaced by a refreshing coolness, and suddenly, he was back, gasping for air in his own body. He awoke in shock. He was alive. The contaminated water should have killed him, but instead, he had been given a second chance. But he was not the same man who had died. The experience changed him completely. He renounced atheism and dedicated his life to sharing what he had seen. He told everyone who would listen about the reality of hell, the torment of lost souls, and the power of calling on Jesus. Brian Melvin's story became one of the most chilling near-death experiences ever recorded, not just because of the terrifying imagery, but because of the undeniable transformation it caused in him. His message was clear. Hell is real, but so is salvation, and for those still living, the choice remains. Which path will you take? Number 7. Dragged to Hell, the near-death experience of Kenneth Hagin. The year was 1933, and a young Kenneth E. Hagin, just 15 years old, lay in his bed, gasping for air. His body had been weak from birth, and now he was slipping away. His heart condition had worsened, and that evening, the unbearable weight of death pressed down on him. His family, desperate and helpless, stood around him, watching his life drained from his fragile body. But what happened next would change the course of his life forever. As his last breath left his body, young Kenneth felt himself being pulled away, not upwards but downwards. Suddenly, everything around him became dark, a blackness so thick and heavy that he could feel it pressing against his spirit. He was being drawn deeper and deeper into the abyss, a pit that seemed endless. The further he descended, the more intense the heat became, and an overpowering stench of death filled the air. Then, in the distance, he saw something terrifying, the very gates of hell. Flames roared violently beyond the entrance, illuminating monstrous, twisted shadows. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. A powerful force dragged him closer and closer, and in that moment he knew he was doomed. At the very edge of the fiery pit, a horrifying creature loomed before him. A demon, enormous and grotesque, reached out, ready to seize him and pull him into the eternal suffering that awaited. But just as the creature's clawed hands reached for him, something miraculous happened. From the depths of his soul, Kenneth heard a voice unlike any he had ever known, a voice full of power and authority. Then, as if an invisible hand took hold of him, he felt himself rushing upwards, away from the flames. He soared through the darkness, back towards his room, and suddenly he was back in his body. His heart started beating again, and his breath returned in ragged gasps. He had been dead, but now he was alive. But this was not the end. Dragged to hell, again. As his family gathered around him, relieved but unaware of what had just happened, young Kenneth felt the same pull again. His soul left his body once more, and he was plunged back into the abyss. The horror was even worse this time. The heat, the darkness, the hopelessness, it all overwhelmed him. He saw the gates of hell growing closer again, and he knew he could do nothing to stop it. The demon, waiting for him, grinned in anticipation. But just as before, at the very last second, a voice of power rang out, a voice that shook the very foundations of hell. And once again he was lifted out, soaring back to his body. Now fully awake, he was gasping for breath, drenched in sweat. But his ordeal wasn't over yet. For the third and final time, the pull came again. No one in the room knew what was happening to him. They only saw his body go limp. Kenneth descended into hell once more, this time faster than before. His heart pounded with terror, but he could do nothing to resist. He reached the gates, the flames reflected in his eyes, and the demonic creature extended its hands toward him. But this time, Kenneth knew what he had to do. From the depths of his soul, with all the strength he could muster, he called upon the name of Jesus Christ. In that instant, the powerful force that had been dragging him down was broken. A mighty force snatched him out of hell's grip, pulling him upward at an unimaginable speed. As he rushed toward the light, he was suddenly back in his body for the final time. His eyes snapped open, and this time he knew he had been given a second chance. Kenneth Hagin's near-death experience changed him forever. He knew without a doubt that hell was real, and he had been given a glimpse of what awaited those who rejected salvation. From that day forward, he dedicated his life to preaching the gospel, warning people about the reality of heaven and hell. He went on to become one of the most influential Christian ministers of the 20th century, spreading the message of faith, redemption, and divine healing. His testimony has shaken the hearts of many, reminding the world that life doesn't end with death, eternity awaits. His story is more than just an account of an NDE. It is a message to the world. The question remains, are we ready for what comes after this life? 8. The man who begged for another chance. Ronald Reagan's chilling near-death story. It was a quiet evening when former U.S. President Ronald Reagan sat down for an interview, sharing stories of his life, faith, and experiences. But among all the stories he had ever told, one stood out, one that sent shivers down the spine of everyone who heard it. It was a true account of a man he knew, a man who had walked the terrifying path of death, only to return with a warning no one could ignore. Reagan spoke of a friend, a man who had always been skeptical of the afterlife. He had lived life on his own terms, never giving much thought to God, sin, or the concept of judgment. Like many, he assumed that if there was something beyond this life, it was probably peaceful, perhaps a vast nothingness, or a simple transition into the unknown. One day, this man suffered a catastrophic medical emergency. Whether it was a heart attack, an accident, or a sudden collapse, Reagan did not specify. What mattered most was that, for a brief but terrifying moment, his body lay lifeless. He had crossed the threshold of death, and what he saw shook him to his core. Hell was real, and he was in it. Unlike the peaceful, glowing light that many NDE survivors describe, this man found himself in a place of indescribable horror. He was surrounded by darkness, not just any darkness, but a suffocating, consuming void that carried a presence of pure evil. The air was thick, filled with an overwhelming sense of despair, the kind that crushed his spirit instantly. And then came the screams, wretched, agonized howls of souls trapped in eternal torment, pleading for mercy that would never come. Fires burned without consuming, and shadows moved with a malevolent intelligence, whispering words he could barely understand. He realized he was not alone. Dark figures lurked around him, entities so sinister that their very presence made his soul tremble. They reached for him, their clawed hands and hollow eyes filled with a hunger beyond human comprehension. This was no dream, no illusion. It was real. He could feel pain without flesh, fear without comfort, regret without escape. He knew in that moment that hell was not just a metaphor. It was a destination. And worst of all, he was meant to be there. Realizing his fate, the man did the only thing he could. He begged for another chance. With every ounce of strength left in him, he screamed into the abyss, pleading for mercy, for salvation, for anything that could pull him from this nightmare. He swore that if he was given another opportunity, he would change everything. His life, his beliefs, his actions. He would seek God, live righteously, and warn others of what awaited beyond death's door. And then, just like that, it ended. He woke up, revived, resuscitated, brought back from the dead. When he regained consciousness, he was no longer the same man. Gone was the skepticism, the arrogance, the indifference toward faith. He had seen something that no words could fully capture, and he would never forget it. From that day on, he devoted himself to living differently, seeking truth, embracing faith, and ensuring that he would never return to the place he had just escaped. Reagan, recounting this tale, emphasized the urgency and gravity of his friend's experience. He shared it not to terrify, but to warn, to remind those who hear it that choices in this life have consequences beyond what we can see. There is a hereafter, and we all have to think about it, Reagan once said in his speeches. But this time, it was not a mere philosophical reflection. It was a testimony of horror, redemption, and second chances. To this day, the details of who this man was remain unknown. Was he a close friend? A political acquaintance? A man Reagan met during his acting career or his presidency? No one knows. But the message remains chillingly clear. Hell is real. And for those who find themselves there, the regret is unbearable. Not everyone gets a second chance. What would you do if you were given one? 9. The chilling story of Jennifer Perez, a journey to hell and back. Jennifer Perez had always lived life on the edge. As a teenager, she was rebellious, rejecting the faith her family had tried to instill in her. She partied hard, disrespected her parents, and had little regard for the consequences of her actions. Life was about fun, freedom, and doing whatever she wanted, until one fateful night changed everything. The night it all changed. One evening, after an intense argument with her mother, Jennifer stormed out of the house. She felt suffocated by the rules and expectations placed upon her. That night, she went out with friends, indulging in drinking and partying harder than usual. But as she stumbled home, an overwhelming dizziness overtook her. Her vision blurred, her heart pounded, and suddenly, everything went black. Jennifer collapsed. As her body lay motionless, she found herself in a terrifying, inescapable darkness. She tried to move, but she had no control. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Fear gripped her soul. Then, she felt an unseen force pulling her downward. The deeper she went, the darker it became. The air grew heavy, and an unbearable heat pressed against her skin. Jennifer could hear distant screams, agonizing cries that sent shivers through her spirit. She struggled, but there was no way to resist the pull dragging her into the unknown. Suddenly, she landed in a nightmarish place, a cavernous, endless abyss filled with flickering red and orange flames. Shadows twisted and moved in unnatural ways. Jennifer's heart pounded with terror. Around her were tortured souls, their faces frozen in expressions of unending agony. The heat was unbearable, and the stench of burning flesh filled the air. Then, she saw them. Among the suffering souls, she recognized faces she had only seen on TV and in magazines, celebrities she had admired. Some of them were screaming, pleading for mercy, while others were completely engulfed in flames, their bodies consumed by an unquenchable fire that never ended. Jennifer saw musicians who had used their influence to promote darkness and sin, actors who had mocked God in their roles, and people who had lived lives of excess, greed, and corruption. She could hardly believe her eyes. These were the icons so many had idolized, the ones millions had followed and admired. One of them looked at her with hollow, sorrowful eyes and whispered, "Don't make the same mistake we did." Jennifer wanted to run, but where could she go? There was no escape. The screams of the damned filled her ears. The horror of what she was witnessing became too much to bear. Then, just as she felt all hope was lost, a powerful voice echoed through the abyss. "It is not yet your time." A brilliant light pierced through the darkness, and Jennifer felt herself being lifted away. The souls below screamed even louder, reaching for her as if they wanted to pull her back down. But they couldn't. The light consumed everything around her, washing away the darkness. Jennifer woke up gasping for air, back in her own body. Tears streamed down her face. She had been given a second chance, a chance to change, to repent, and to warn others about what she had seen. Jennifer's life was never the same after that experience. She abandoned her rebellious ways, turning to faith with a passion she had never known before. She began sharing her story, warning others not to take life and their choices lightly. "Hell is real," she would say, "and so many people are headed there without even realizing it." She spoke in churches, to youth groups, and to anyone who would listen. Some mocked her, but others were deeply shaken by her words. She knew she had been sent back for a reason, to pull as many people away from the path she had once walked. Jennifer's experience stands as a chilling reminder that our actions have consequences, and that the choices we make in life echo for eternity. Her testimony leaves people with one haunting question: what if she was telling the truth? Would you be ready? 10. A Journey Through Darkness. The near-death experience of Tamara LaRue. Tamara LaRue was a young woman consumed by pain, rejection, and despair. Her life felt like an endless cycle of suffering, and the only escape she saw was death. One fateful day, in the depths of her hopelessness, she made a devastating decision. She took a gun and shot herself in the chest. But instead of the peace she longed for, Tamara found herself falling into a pit of darkness. Her spirit had left her body, and she descended into a place of absolute torment. Surrounded by unimaginable suffering, she saw countless lost souls, all crying out in regret. The pain she felt was no longer just physical. It was spiritual, emotional, and eternal. Every ounce of hopelessness she had felt in life was multiplied 1,000 times over. She could feel the weight of every bad decision, every wrong choice pressing upon her. She had believed that death would be an escape, but instead, she had entered something far worse. Tamara realized that she had made a terrible mistake. She cried out, but there was no answer. The emptiness was suffocating. It was in that moment, when she had given up all hope, that something miraculous happened. From the depths of her despair, a brilliant light shone through. A hand, divine, powerful, full of love, reached into the darkness and pulled her out. Tamara suddenly found herself back in her body, alive. The bullet had torn through her chest, but miraculously she survived. Tamara knew that she had been given a second chance. She had seen what awaited those who fell into despair without hope, and she was determined never to return. She dedicated her life to sharing her story, warning others that suicide is not an escape. But there is always hope. These people were given a terrifying glimpse into the afterlife, one that changed them forever. They had experienced hell firsthand, and they returned not just to tell their stories, but to warn others. Their experiences remind us that our actions and choices matter. They believed they were beyond hope, but divine intervention showed them that grace, redemption, and a new beginning are always possible. Their message is clear. No matter how deep your pain, no matter how lost you feel, there is always a way back. Never give up hope. If you found this afterlife experience content fascinating and thought-provoking, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories. Like this video to show your support, and share it with others so they too can explore the mysteries of what lies beyond. Your engagement helps us bring more eye-opening content to you. Stay curious, stay open-minded, and keep the conversation going.